On the outskirts of a forgotten town, where the mist clung to the ground like a shroud, stood an old iron bridge. It spanned a deep ravine, its rusted beams creaking in the wind. The locals called it Blackwood Bridge, a name whispered in fear, for it was said to be haunted by the spirit of a prisoner who lost his life there. Years ago, a man named Elias was accused of a crime he didn't commit. Framed for the murder of a beloved townsperson, Elias was taken to the prison on the edge of the woods. Despite his protest of innocence, the townsfolk turned against him, their anger and fear painting him as a monster. One stormy night, a group of townspeople, fueled by their own rage and desperation for justice, took matters into their own hands. They marched to the prison, dragging Elias from his cell, his wrists bound with chains. They accused him of curses and sorcery, claiming his mere presence brought misfortune to the town. They brought him to Blackwood Bridge, where they intended to cast him into the ravine as a sacrifice to appease the restless spirits they believed he had summoned. Rain poured down, soaking them all, as thunder rumbled ominously overhead. Elias pleaded for his life, but the fury of the crowd drowned out his cries. In the chaos, they pushed him to the edge, and with one swift motion, he was gone, his body swallowed by the darkness below. After that night, the bridge took on a sinister reputation. Travelers spoke of a chill that settled over the area, of shadows that flickered in the corner of their eyes. They claimed to hear whispers in the wind, lamentations echoing the pain of a man wronged. Some said that on stormy nights the sound of chains clinking could be heard, a ghostly reminder of the man who once stood upon that very bridge. One evening, me and my friends, daring each other to face our fears, we decided to test the legends. We gathered at Blackwood Bridge, flashlights in hand. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the atmosphere shifted, the air thickened, and a low mist crept along the ground. We stood at the center of the bridge, recounting the tale of Elias, the poor prisoner. As we spoke his name, a sudden gust of wind whipped through, snuffing out our lights and plunging us into darkness. Panic set in. We tried to relight our flashlights, but they wouldn't work. When we finally succeeded, I gasped in horror. Standing at the far end of the bridge was a figure, a man, gaunt and pale, his eyes hollow and sorrowful. "Help me," the figure rasped, his voice barely above a whisper, yet it echoed as if carried by 1,000 voices. I was paralyzed, a mix of fear and disbelief flooding in my mind. We turned to run, but the bridge seemed to warp and twist, trapping us in its grip. The figure took a step forward, chains clinking around his ankles, the sound hauntingly familiar. "You must know the truth," he said, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. The air turned frigid, and a spectral wind rushed past, carrying with it the scent of decay. That was too much for me. I gathered all the courage I had, turned and started to run. I guess my actions also jolted my friends out of the juice they were in. The next moment, we were all running away regardless. When we got off the bridge, I turned around to see thing we all saw. But to our surprise, the figure was gone, but the chill lingered, and the clinking of chains faded into the distance. We stumbled back to town. Our hearts were racing. From that night on, no one dared cross Blackwood Bridge after dark. I've always been a skeptic when it comes to ghost stories, but that changed one rainy night in my grandmother's old house. It was a creaky, ancient place filled with dusty antiques and shadowy corners. My grandmother had passed away a few months earlier, and I had come to help clean up before the house was sold. As I sorted through her belongings, I felt a chill in the air, but I brushed it off as a draft. I was alone, but I found comfort in the familiar smell of her lavender-scented candles, the ones she always lit during her evening tea. Late that night, I decided to take a break and poured myself a cup of tea. As I sipped, I noticed a flicker of light in the hallway. Curiosity got the better of me, and I set my cup down to investigate. The hallway was dark, but the flickering light seemed to come from the end near my grandmother's old bedroom. I approached cautiously, my heart beating louder with each step. As I neared the door, I realized the light was coming from within the room. I hesitated for a moment, feeling an inexplicable urge to turn back, but I pushed the door open anyway, half expecting to find a faulty light bulb. What I saw made my blood run cold. A woman in a long, flowing white dress stood at the foot of the bed, her back turned to me. The fabric shimmered in the dim light, but I couldn't see her face. My breath hitched in my throat as I whispered, "Hello?" She didn't turn around. Instead, she raised a hand and pointed toward the window. I felt a pull, as if something within me compelled me to follow her gesture. I stepped closer, and as I did, the room grew colder, the air thick with an unsettling energy. Suddenly, the woman turned to face me. Her face was pale, her eyes dark voids, and a twisted smile crept across her lips. Fear paralyzed me. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. She began to glide toward me, her feet barely touching the ground. "Leave this place," she whispered, her voice like rustling leaves. "You don't belong here." My instinct kicked in, and I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my grandmother's old rug. The woman's expression morphed into a look of fury, and I felt a force push me back, slamming the door behind me. Heart racing, I ran down the hall and into the living room, desperately trying to convince myself I had imagined it. I took deep breaths, trying to steady my nerves, but then I heard it, a soft muttering echoing from the hallway. Against my better judgment, I crept back toward the sound. As I approached, I saw the white dress billowing softly, the woman now sitting on the stairs, her face hidden in her hands. I couldn't see her features, but the despair radiating from her was palpable. "Who are you?" I mumbled. She slowly looked at me, and her sobbing face became face filled with anger. She screamed, "Leave!" Before I could react, the temperature dropped again, and she vanished into the shadows, leaving me alone on the stairs. I stood there, shaken. I never saw the woman in white again. The house still stands, empty now, but I know the woman in white will always linger in its halls. The night was heavy with the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. I was a teenager at the time, curious and reckless, drawn to the occult as if it were a moth to a flame. My friends and I had read about summoning spirits, and one chilly October evening, we decided to try it ourselves. We gathered in my basement, dimly lit by flickering candles that cast dancing shadows on the walls. The air was thick with excitement and a hint of fear. We set up a small table, placed a makeshift Ouija board on top a piece of cardboard with letters hastily scrawled in marker. I could feel my heart pounding as we joined hands, our fingers resting lightly on the planchette. "Is there anyone here with us?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. At first, there was nothing but the sound of our collective breaths. I started to feel foolish, but then the planchette began to move. It slid across the board, stopping at "Yes." My friends gasped, eyes wide with shock and fear, while a cold chill wrapped around me like a shroud. We asked questions, and the planchette responded, spelling out cryptic messages. It spoke of lost souls and unfinished business. At one point, it spelled out my name, sending a wave of dread coursing through me. Who was this entity, and why was it reaching out? The air thickened, and the temperature dropped. I could see my breath. My mind raced with panic, but curiosity kept me rooted to the spot. Then came a knock, a loud, deliberate thud that echoed through the basement, making us jump. We exchanged nervous glances, but I urged us to continue. As we asked more questions, the atmosphere shifted. The lights flickered, and I felt an overwhelming sensation of being watched. The planchette began to move faster, spelling out, "Leave." I laughed nervously, trying to dismiss it as a prank. But deep down, I could sense that something was terribly wrong. "Who's here?" I demanded, my voice shaking. The response was chilling. The planchette spelled, "Sorry." Then, "Take." Then the lights went out completely. The darkness was suffocating. Panic set in. I felt the air thicken, almost pulsate with a malevolent energy. I heard whispers faint, insidious. My friends started to scream, their terror infectious, and I felt a primal urge to flee. In the chaos, I yanked my hands away from the board. The moment I did, the whispers intensified, a cacophony of pleading and rage. I scrambled toward the stairs, my heart pounding in my ears. My friends followed, and we burst into the dimly lit hallway, gasping for breath. We didn't look back as we ran outside into the cold night air, shivering from both the chill and the terror that had gripped us. The basement felt like a distant nightmare, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that we had opened a door we weren't meant to. In the following days, strange things began to happen. Shadows flickered at the corners of my vision, and I would often wake in the middle of the night, convinced I could hear someone whispering my name. My friends reported similar experiences and uneasy feelings, as if something was lurking just beyond our perception. We never spoke of that night again, but I often wonder what we unleashed. Sometimes, when I'm alone, I feel a cold breath against my neck or hear faint whispers just out of reach. And I know we should have never played with forces we couldn't understand.